Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. Get ready for today's unnerving journey. Moving to Charleston, South Carolina was supposed to be a fresh start for me and my golden retriever Max. The little house I rented sat at the end of a quiet street, bordered by dense, moss-draped trees, typical of the low country. It wasn't much, but it was cozy. Best of all, the yard was big enough for Max to run around. At least, that was the plan. Max had always been a happy, playful dog, but within days of moving in, he started acting strangely. He'd pace by the back door, barking at nothing. At first, I thought it was just him adjusting to the new environment. Until the night he disappeared. I came home from running errands to find the back gate wide open. My heart sank as I called for Max, my voice echoing through the empty yard. He didn't come running like he always did. Grabbing a flashlight, I searched the neighborhood. The air was thick with humidity, and the streets were eerily quiet. "Max!" I yelled over and over, but there was no response. I didn't sleep that night. The next evening, as I was preparing lost dog flyers, I heard it, a faint, distant barking. It was unmistakably Max. I ran outside, following the sound through the darkened streets. The barking seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Every time I thought I was getting closer, it stopped, only to start again from another direction. By midnight, I was back at my house, frustrated and on edge. This pattern repeated for the next 2 nights. Each time, the barking would start after sunset, leading me on a wild goose chase. I checked the woods, the alleys, even the nearby creek, but there was no sign of him. On the 4th day, I expanded my search to include houses farther down the street. That's when I noticed the shed. It belonged to the house 3 doors down, a weathered old place with peeling paint and a rusted fence. I hadn't seen anyone go in or out since I moved in. The barking was faint, but steady, and it seemed to be coming from there. My pulse quickened as I approached the shed. The door was padlocked, but through the small, grimy window, I caught a glimpse of golden fur. "Max!" I whispered. His tail wagged furiously, and he let out a muffled bark. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. Tied to his collar was a folded piece of paper. I broke the lock with the tire iron I found near the house and freed Max, who bolted into my arms. Tears streamed down my face as I held him, but my hands trembled as I reached for the note. In blocky, uneven handwriting, it read, "Leave. You don't belong here." I reported the incident to the police, but they didn't seem too concerned. "Probably a prank," the officer said, handing the note back to me. "Kids messing around." I wasn't convinced. Over the next few days, I started noticing other odd things. My trash cans tipped over, scratches on my car door, and once a shadowy figure standing at the edge of my yard late at night. When I shouted, they disappeared into the trees. The police didn't take me seriously, but I knew better. Someone in the neighborhood didn't want me there. The night I decided to leave, I heard the barking again. Only this time it wasn't Max. It was a recording, a looping mechanical version of his bark, playing just outside my bedroom window. My blood ran cold as I peeked out and saw a portable speaker sitting in the grass. That was it. I packed what I could, loaded Max into the car, and drove away from Charleston before the sun came up. I never found out who took Max, or why they wanted me gone. Maybe it was a neighbor with a grudge, or maybe I'd stumbled into something darker than I could understand. When my family moved to Salem, Oregon, it felt like a dream come true. We had just closed on a charming old house at the edge of town, nestled near the tall pines that lined Mill Creek. It was the kind of place you could picture raising kids in, with a big backyard and a covered porch. The realtor mentioned the house had been vacant for a few months, and the price was too good to pass up. The first few days were a blur of unpacking and settling in. While exploring, we found a few things left behind. A scratched-up dresser in one bedroom, mismatched plates in the kitchen, and some old magazines stuffed in a drawer. It was strange, but not alarming. People leave things behind all the time, right? Then, late one evening, I was sorting through the clutter in the attic when I found something unusual. A duffel bag stuffed with clothes and toiletries. The items looked worn, but fresh enough that I knew they hadn't been sitting there long. When I showed it to my wife, Erin, she shrugged. Maybe someone forgot it during the move. But if they forgot it, why did it smell like shampoo? That night, as we lay in bed, I heard it. A faint creak, like someone stepping on a loose floorboard. I nudged Erin. "Do you hear that?" She groaned. "It's an old house, Chris. The floors creak." I tried to convince myself she was right, but as the noise continued, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just the house settling. The sound seemed deliberate, soft, slow, and paced, almost as if someone was walking from one end of the hallway to the other. The next day, I decided to check every room in the house. Nothing seemed out of place until I got to the basement. The basement was cold and smelled faintly of mildew. As I descended the creaky stairs, I noticed a pile of blankets tucked behind the water heater. My stomach churned. Someone had been sleeping there. I told Erin, and we called the police. They did a quick search, but whoever had been there was long gone. They assured us it was probably just a squatter who hadn't realized the house had new owners. For a while, we tried to believe that. But then, the footsteps started again. It always happened late at night, long after the kids had gone to bed. At first, it was subtle, almost imperceptible, but by the second week, it was unmistakable. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard them again. Slow, deliberate steps, moving down the hallway. This time, I didn't wake Erin. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under the bed and stepped into the hall. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, the house was silent. Then, from the far end of the hallway, a door creaked open. I followed the noise to the spare bedroom we hadn't fully unpacked yet. My heart pounded as I pushed the door open. The room was dark, but the closet door was ajar. I raised the bat, my hands sweating, and yanked the closet door open. Inside was a man. He was thin with matted hair and wild eyes. He looked as shocked to see me as I was to see him. Before I could react, he bolted, shoving past me and disappearing down the hall. I chased him as far as the kitchen, but by the time I got there, the back door was swinging open. The police came again and searched the house more thoroughly this time. They found evidence that the man had been living in the crawl space beneath the house. A mattress, canned food, and even the stash of our belongings that had gone missing. As the investigation continued, the truth unraveled. The intruder wasn't connected to the house at all. He was a drifter who had been living off the grid for years, using abandoned buildings and unoccupied spaces to survive. He had stumbled upon our home before we moved in and stayed even after we arrived. We changed the locks, boarded up the crawl space, and tried to move on, but the damage was done. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart race, and every shadow felt like it was watching us. We lasted 6 months in that house before we finally sold it and moved out of Salem. To this day, I can't step into a new home without checking every closet, every attic, every crawl space, because sometimes a house isn't empty, no matter how alone you think you are. Moving to Maplewood, New Jersey felt like entering a picture-perfect world. The neighborhood was charming, quiet streets shaded by oak trees, meticulously maintained lawns, and friendly neighbors who greeted us warmly. It felt safe, the kind of place where you didn't worry about locking your doors during the day. For the first few weeks, everything was perfect. My wife Anna and I were thrilled to see how quickly our 12-year-old daughter Emily adjusted. She loved her new room, especially the big bay window overlooking the backyard. Our next-door neighbor, Mr. Callahan, introduced himself on our second day. He was in his late 50s, tall, with a thin frame and graying hair. He seemed pleasant enough, but there was something about the way he focused on Emily during our conversation that unsettled me. "Your daughter is beautiful," he said, smiling. "She reminds me of my niece when she was her age." I brushed it off at the time, chalking it up to an awkward compliment. He lived alone and didn't seem to interact much with others, so maybe he was just socially awkward. But as days turned into weeks, his behavior grew more concerning. Whenever Emily was outside, whether she was riding her bike or playing with our dog, Mr. Callahan always seemed to be nearby. He'd linger at the edge of his property, pretending to trim the hedges or water the grass, but his eyes would always be on her. Anna noticed it too. "Have you seen how often he's outside when Emily is?" she asked one evening. I nodded, trying to suppress the growing unease in my chest. "I'll talk to him, if it keeps up." But things escalated before I had the chance. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of our dog Max barking furiously. He was downstairs, growling and snapping at something outside. I got out of bed, half asleep, and went to check on him. As I passed by Emily's room, I froze. Her window was open, the curtain fluttering in the cool night air. "Emily," I whispered, my heart pounding. I rushed to her bed and found her still asleep, unaware of the open window. Then I heard it, a faint scraping noise, like metal against wood. I looked outside and saw him. Mr. Callahan was standing on a ladder, halfway up to Emily's window, with a crowbar in his hand. My blood turned to ice. Without thinking, I grabbed a baseball bat from the hallway closet and sprinted outside, shouting loud enough to wake the entire block. "Get the hell away from my house." Callahan stumbled off the ladder and fell to the ground, dropping the crowbar with a loud clang. He scrambled to his feet, mumbling something I couldn't hear, and ran back to his house. I stood there, shaking with rage, as neighbors started turning on their lights and stepping outside. The police arrived within minutes. Callahan tried to deny everything, claiming he was just checking on a loose shutter, but the ladder, the crowbar, and his record, yes, he had a record, told a different story. Apparently, Callahan had been arrested years ago for stalking a teenage girl in another town. He had somehow managed to avoid prison time, but was forced to move away. Maplewood had no idea who they'd welcomed into their community. That night changed everything for us. We installed security cameras, reinforced Emily's windows, and made sure she never went outside alone. We thought Maplewood was the perfect place to start fresh, but it was a chilling reminder that danger can lurk even in the safest neighborhoods. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.